One of the big stories of this year is that the crew of the first Starliner launch have not yet returned to Earth from the International Space Station.
Yeah, so today we dig a little bit deeper and also take some time to talk about misinformation.
Please let us know your thoughts. Let us know via our social media pages at Space and Things Podcast on Threads, Instagram, and Facebook, via the contact form on our website, or by leaving a review on your podcast platform.
And please consider joining us on patreon.com/Space and Things. But right now, it's time for episode 206 of the Space and Things podcast.
Oh my God! Unbelievable! Unbelievable, but it is right this time.
This is the Space and Things podcast with Emily Carney and Dave Giles.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 206 of our podcast. How you doing, Emily?
I'm doing good. I'm a little tired today just because at the day of recording this, we just had a bad tropical storm here. So things got a little sporty overnight, but we're safe. That's all that matters. We're safe here, but a little tired. But other than that, I'm good. How are you doing, Dave?
Yeah, not bad. Had a good time in Germany and Austria, so that was good. And Taylor Swift was amazing,
awesome.
So that was cool. Now back to work. So
yeah.
Before we start this week's main topic, Emily, I just want to revisit our episode from a couple of weeks ago where we discussed our favourite missions. And we had some great correspondence from our listeners, so I thought we'd share a few of them. Dorian Barbier sent us a lovely email all the way from France. Dorian, I hope I pronounced your surname correct. It's a beautiful name if I did. Thank you very much for your email. We appreciate all the comments you said. But with regard to favourites, Dorian had this to say.
Similarly to Emily, I'd say there is quite of work of intense reflecting to do, and I'd even go down the no answer path because there are per se no space missions which are superior or inferior to another one, or relate to a same technical and scientific field, which are by themselves extraordinary, and one can't pretend to quantify what would remain partially out of reach. Anyway, for the sake of the question, let's go on with ASTP, Apollo-Soyuz, on the crewed side, an astounding demonstration of international partnership comprised of two exceptional crews, including Deke Slayton, Tom Stafford, and Alexei freaking Leonov. I agree, Alexei freaking Leonov is pretty awesome. And on an uncrewed ground, I'm ranging myself along Dave with the mighty but anecdotal attempts at exploring Venus. The Venera missions in particular would deserve so much more promotion.
Yeah,
awesome.
I think it was actually you who mentioned the Venus missions, but yes, great comments. Richard Southworth also joined in the conversation on Instagram saying,
I thought about such missions as Apollo 9, which produced some of my favorite pictures of the program, and Apollo 15, but in my heart, my favorite has to be Apollo 11, the history maker, which most fueled my fascination. Unmanned is probably Cassini-Huygens. I think that's how it's pronounced. Oh my God. I was in college when that landed on Titan, and it was really exciting to see those pictures. At any age, it really felt like exploring the unknown.
And also on Instagram, Jim, the host of Taking Up Space on YouTube, said,
this one really got me thinking. While I wasn't alive in 1962, it was a film strip on Friendship 7 I saw in second grade, 1977. That proved to be the Big Bang moment for me, so this flight will always hold a special place for me. Unmanned, yeah, Voyager. We almost have to take that one off the table. After that, it's a tie. Magellan's radar mapping and 3D visualization of Venus, which is mind-blowing, and Cassini of all the images, the ones of Enceladus, for what could be found in there in the future. Never mind other life in the universe. It could be right in our own backyard.
Yeah. We heard from others too, and thanks to all who got in touch. We really do love hearing from you. We probably need to spend some more time making sure we read out some of your correspondence and responding to it. So, Emily, do you have any thoughts on what Jim, Richard, or Dorian has said there?
Yeah, I'm glad somebody agreed with me about the Venus missions because normally nobody brings those up. They're more obscure. And Venus is just such a obscure planet because it's just... I don't know how to put this nicely in a family-friendly manner, but it's a hellscape. It is a hellscape. No one's going to ever, live there, basically. We're not going to be able to land people on there, so it's not probably one of the best explored places just because it's such a challenge to visit. So I'm glad somebody gave Venus a bit of a shout-out because it's one of my favorite planets. It's because it's so freaking weird, and I want to know more. Richard mentioned Apollo 9 as well. We've had I have a soft spot for Apollo 9. Rusty, we've had on our show before. We love Rusty Schweikert. And it's just such an underrated test mission. Like, nobody talks about that one because they didn't go to the moon. They went around the Earth in the LEM.
Yeah.
But if it hadn't been for that, they wouldn't have gone to the moon. So it's really awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think Richard's nailed it as well with his comments about Apollo 11. You know,
Yes.
what do you call it? The history maker that most fueled my fascination. And I think that was probably the same for a lot of us. But it's amazing that we didn't mention Friendship 7 or any of the Mercury flights when we had our discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, they're quite pioneer. Well, they're extremely pioneering, aren't they? And pretty crazy. So it was great to hear from you. And thanks to other people who got in touch. But Emily, let's crack on with this episode.
Greetings, Earthlings. We interrupt your regular programming to bring you an important message. It's time to crack on.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about Starliner and also misinformation. So first, let's give you the basics. The Boeing CST-100 Starliner is a spacecraft designed to transport astronauts to the International Space Station and other low Earth orbit destinations. Developed under NASA's Commercial Crew Program, it can carry up to 7 crew members and is designed for use up to 10 times. The Starliner also features autonomous and manual control capabilities and typically launches atop a Atlas V rocket. I almost misspoke and said Saturn V, but that would be pretty cool. Atlas V, not Saturn V. Unlike other spacecraft, it lands on solid ground, which is a little unusual. The only other spacecraft I think that does that is Soyuz. That's crewed. Using parachutes and airbags.
New Shepard does as well.
Okay, yep, exactly, duh.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, it's a little, we're used to seeing splashdowns, I think, historically, and this does not splash down. This, I don't know what the term would be for that, ground down? I have no idea. Collision? I have no clue, but yeah, lands on the ground.
I like the airbags as well. I think that's fun. Anyway,
right?
Before this current flight, there had been 2 test flights. The first uncrewed test flight in December 2019 did not reach the International Space Station due to an anomaly, but it did return safely to Earth. The second took place in May 2022, managed to dock to the International Space Station for 4 days, and then landed back in White Sands Missile Range. That mission was delayed from the year before, where there was a number of problems in the run-up to that launch. But the mission itself was considered as a success and met all the objectives. However, in August 2023, over a year after that, Boeing announced that the crew test flight would be delayed to March the 24th at the earliest due to issues with the strength of certain joints within the parachute system and concerns over the potential for combustion of the wiring harnesses.
And as we've spoken about over the previous few months, Starliner finally launched with a 2-person crew on June 5th this year for its first crewed test flight. The crew consists of NASA astronauts Barry Wilmore, and Sunita Williams. This mission was meant to last 8 days, but as of today, it is August the 5th, it is still on the go 2 months after the launch. It is worth noting that this mission was originally scheduled for 2017 and was supposed to run alongside the SpaceX Dragon test, which were also delayed, but launched with a crew for the first time in 2020, I believe in May 2020. Sunita Williams has become the first woman to fly on a maiden crewed flight of an orbital spacecraft. The first launch attempt was on May 6, which was scrubbed due to a problem with an oxygen valve on the Rocket Centaur upper stage, which obviously isn't anything to do with Starliner itself, which sits atop of that upper stage. However, NASA and Boeing then found an unrelated issue of a small helium leak on Starliner's propulsion system, which delayed the launch further.
Okay, here's where we get into what's kind of going on now, because on 24th of May, NASA and Boeing announced the plan to launch on the 1st of June without repairing that helium leak, determining that the spacecraft was safe to fly even if the leak rate worsened by many times. The same review uncovered a design vulnerability in the propulsion system that could prevent the spacecraft from completing a deorbit burn in a very remote failure mode. So engineers devised a new re-entry mode to employ should this occur. The second launch attempt was scrubbed due to a redundant ground launch sequencer computer, which gave slower than normal readings and was eventually pinned down to a single faulty power supply unit connected to the computer. We've all experienced that, I'm sure. And as Emily said, it eventually launched on the 5th of June on the 100th flight of the Atlas V rocket.
So in the hours after the launch, Wilmore and Williams performed a number of manual maneuvering exercises. While Starliner can operate autonomously, and these maneuvers wouldn't be expected to be used in a normal mission. They seemed to go well, but later on, flight controllers detected 2 more helium leaks in different parts of the propulsion system. The team made a plan, and the docking attempt with the ISS was not changed as a result. However, as Starliner approached the ISS, 5 RCS, reaction control system thrusters, unexpectedly, ceased to work. 4 of these were brought back by doing a series of resets, and Starliner eventually docked to the station. A 4th helium leak was discovered after docking, and another has since been found in the service module. The thruster that was deemed unusable during the docking will remain so for the rest of the mission.
Yeah, I like that. Just reset the thrusters, turn them off, turn them on again, see if they work.
That's what we do in IT.
Yeah, there you go. So essentially since then, while the crew have helped the rest of the ISS crew with onboard research and activities, the team on the ground have been trying to figure out what has happened and delayed the return to Earth to perform extra tests. The reports coming out of Boeing have downplayed the issues, with Mark Nappy, the vice president and manager of Boeing's commercial crew program, saying, "Those are pretty small, really, issues to deal with. We'll figure them out for the next mission. I don't see these as significant at all." The thruster issue seems to be more of an issue that perhaps we're not being told fully about, with NASA and Boeing completing testing of a thruster on a test stand in White Sands, and the thrusters also being tested in space while docked to the station. NASA said the preliminary results from these tests were helpful.
In summation, we are currently in a situation where no return date has been set for the crew, and the internet is awash with speculation and misinformation, some suggesting the crew are stuck in space or that plans are being made to bring them home on a different spacecraft. It bears mentioning that nothing has been reported by NASA or Boeing or anyone involved officially. And Starliner also seemed to get caught up in another drama too. You may remember that we discussed that a training drill on the ground was accidentally aired on NASA channels out to the public, which suggested there had been some kind of awful accident and the commander needed to be sent home quickly. While the whole thing was squashed by NASA within 30 minutes of that happening, in that time, a number of people were speculating that it was Starliner that had caused the problems. How they knew this or even got to that point is still unclear, but that is the age we live in right now.
Yeah, so we'll come back to that later. But this week, an article was written by Eric Berger on ArsTechnica.com, in which he has tried to piece together what he knows. He's broken it down to 4 points, and we'll read these directly from the article, and a link to that article will, of course, be in the show notes. Point 1, NASA keeps delaying a decision. A flight readiness review meeting had been scheduled for August the 1st, however, it was cancelled. Instead, NASA put out a vague blog update on Thursday stating, "Following the completion of Starliner's return planning, which is expected to continue into the next week, more information will be shared about the agency's return readiness review preparations and subsequent media briefing." So maybe that meeting will take place next week.
Point 2, NASA has issued a $266,000, $678 task award to SpaceX on July 14th for a, quote, special study for emergency response. NASA said that the study was not directly related to Starliner's problems, but 2 sources told ours it really was. Although the study entailed work on flying more than 4 crew members home on Crew Dragon, a scenario related to Frank Rubio and the Soyuz MS-22 leaks of a little while back. It also allowed for SpaceX to study flying Dragon home with 6 passengers, a regular crew complement in addition to Wilmore and Williams.
Yeah, just to clarify, that's $266,678.
Yeah, my brain is not braining right now. I didn't sleep good. So,
it's all right. It's all
I
right.
saw numbers and I was like, oh God, I got to do math now.
Yeah.
So go on.
Well, it's such a random number as well. Anyway.
I know. It's not like it's not like,
Why not just round it up?
$200,000.
Yeah, $270,000. Let's just round it up.
Very a precise number. Yeah, exactly.
So point 3, SpaceX has been actively working on a scenario in which 2 or 4 astronauts launch on board Crew 9. the normal crews. 4, of course. This mission has a nominal launch date of August the 18th, but it could well be delayed. SpaceX has already identified flight suits that would fit Wilmore and Williams, allowing them to fly home on the Crew 8 spacecraft presently docked in the space station, or the Crew 9 vehicle. It's unclear how crews would be assigned to the 2 Dragon return flights. It is possible, if 4 astronauts launch on Crew 9, that 5 people could come home on each of the 2 Dragons.
2 sources told Ars Technica that in meetings this week at NASA field centers, there have been vigorous discussions about whether or not to fly crew home on Starliner. Multiple groups remain no on Starliner as of Wednesday, July 31st, which was last week. It is unclear how this will be resolved. Some engineers believe that there are questions about Starliner, then NASA should opt for the safe course, flying on Crew Dragon, which has launched safely 13 times and landed 12 times.
Yep. So as we just said, that was all quoted, other than our little drop-ins, but that was all from this Eric Berger article. And I've been thinking a lot about it, and I've got many opinions on it. Firstly, I'd like to state that I've got a lot of respect for Eric Berger and his work, and I'd love to get him on the podcast at some point. I think the article on the whole is probably probably good and probably accurate. Most of the time I read things by him, it turns out he's correct. My issue with some of the points above and other things suggested in the article is how much of it comes from, in inverted commas, sources, all of which are unnamed.
Who's it coming from?
Yes, and while Eric has been proved right in the past, I just want to know more. And I know that journalists need to sometimes not name their sources and the ethics around that. I understand
If the person's afraid of getting fired, which unfortunately that is a thing.
But isn't that a shame?
It is a shame. Yeah. I think people in any government agency related, even if they're a contractor, even if it's government agency related, should be allowed to be completely open, even if it's not good. Even if it's not the status quo, they should be allowed to not worry about their job, even if it's not a good thing.
And these aren't military missions, so it's not like there's national security involved, as far as I'm aware. Shouldn't be. So yes, in the days of misinformation, anything for me that isn't explicitly from either NASA or Boeing directly perhaps isn't very helpful. And I don't blame Eric or Ars Technica for that. I'm really disappointed that we've not had more information from NASA or Boeing. And I don't know why they wouldn't be more open about what is going on, what they're doing, and what the potential options are. I don't see what the issue is with just laying it all out. Sure, you can say that we expect to complete the mission as planned. And you can always say, look, we plan on doing it the way we intended on, the way we originally thing, but our backup options are number 1, this, number 2, number 3, that. Surely that has to be good for all concerned in order to stop wild speculation and misinformation. And also, I'm struggling to see why they wouldn't have these solutions in place beforehand.
Yeah.
When you're testing a new vehicle and yet and it's going to a place where 2 other vehicles that can carry crew can go to, why would there not already be contingencies in place for if this one doesn't go well? Yeah. Maybe there are, but we're not being told it. And that's the thing. You then open it up to wild speculation. And this weekend, beyond spaceflight, in this country, in the UK in particular, misinformation has caused many, many, many problems.
Yeah.
We've had riots on the streets over it. Therefore, I'm really fed up with misinformation. And I'm really fed up with not getting the full information when we should, and I don't understand why we wouldn't, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Emily.
I agree with you entirely. In the last, I'll be real. I had to take a break from social media for a little while just because. With the Olympics, there was misinformation coming out about the Olympics and about certain people competing in the Olympics. And that really got me mad because it was just total misinformation. Like, people were repeating stuff, and I'm like, you did not look into you did no research into this. Like, you didn't Google, you just reposted something somebody put on Facebook. Like, that is not, don't do that. Like, you can't, that's not information. That's not, like, and it's just disappointing to me because I'm like, before I try to post anything, and I'm not a saint. I posted stuff, I'm sure, in the past that's been wrong before, I'm sure all of us have, but it's like, I feel like if everybody has a responsibility to sort of not do this, and to sort of be like, just common sense, like, does this make sense? Do you think this would happen? So I totally agree with you about the misinformation part, because lately I had to take a break from social media for my mental health, because I am seeing people lose their minds on social media and they haven't done the basic amount of reading on something. And that's very concerning to me, because I'm like, what are you doing? Like, and number one, some of it doesn't even concern them. Like, what do you have to do with the Olympics? Are you in Paris? Are you competing in the Olympics? Like, but that's just one example. That's the Olympics. That's not, as far as spaceflight is concerned, as far as Starliner, I do agree with you on all these. I do agree with you on many of these points. I think I don't want to criticize NASA, because I'm aware that this is part of the Commercial Crew Program and Boeing is a contractor and Boeing designed the spacecraft and stuff. And I'm not really blaming, I don't want to make it sound like I'm crapping on NASA or anything like that. But I think that, and I just actually sent you an article from The Guardian, the UK paper, that really encapsulates a lot of how I feel. And we'll put it in the show notes, but I just sent it to Dave in the comments, and NASA kind of lost control of that narrative by not saying anything. Yeah. That's the thing, because I feel this is this is probably a horrible comparison, because thankfully nobody's gotten hurt on Starliner. But when Apollo 1 happened, I feel that's a horrible tragedy, what happened. People died. And I'm not comparing this in the same sense. I don't want to make it sound like I'm making it the same scenario, because it wasn't. But I felt in a lot of ways NASA handled it pretty well. They got a experienced astronaut to help investigate it and to help troubleshoot what was actually happening. They got Frank Borman, who, if this guy was on the job, things were going to get done, right? And I felt in a lot of ways, and some probably will disagree with me, and that's fine. But I felt in many ways NASA was pretty open about what was going on. They were open, I think, with the public, about, okay, this is what happened. We screwed up, and like I said, a lot of people will disagree with me, but I felt they sort of, they put a seasoned astronaut on it, and I felt like, at least publicly, I didn't feel like they tried to cover up. I personally, in my opinion, I don't feel like there was much of a cover up. And same with like Columbia. I felt like NASA dealt with a horrible, horrible situation quite openly during that time. Challenger, I don't think they dealt with it the right way. That's a whole other episode unto itself. But yeah. I feel like them not really saying anything, and then I feel they're being vague, like that blog post that Eric Berger was talking about. Yeah. And I just don't think that's the right way to deal with it. My thing is, like, you got to be totally honest with people. Like, if you don't know an answer, just say, we don't know what's going on. I know that's not very confidence infusing, but that's the truth. Yeah. Even
we
if
don't
they
know what's going on, but we have this
Yeah.
backup plan.
Yeah, exactly.
Or we're working on a backup plan, and in the meantime, the astronauts are fine on the station. They're not stranded.
Correct.
We have other ways of getting them home.
Yeah, and they're healthy.
And they're healthy,
fine. Nobody's sick or dying, or nothing bad is happening to them, regardless of what you may have heard on social media from people, exactly, just something like that. And I feel like they have dropped the ball on that totally, because I feel like the lack of any kind of information coming out is leading people, to some people, not everybody, but I feel like it's leading people maybe with less experience with this to sort of speculate and go nuts with like, oh my God, they're stranded. Oh my God, this and that and all. And it's like, no, they're not stranded. They're just waiting on, I guess, test results and waiting on further options. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, everybody does that in some degree. Like if you're at work, if you have a problem at your job, as far as you're trying to do something, you want to get backup one, right? You want to get other options and people to weigh in on it, blah, blah, blah. That's not abnormal. That's perfectly fine, but it gets worse if you try to hide it. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like that's what NASA, I feel like, they could be a little more open about this, and they did lose control of the narrative, which leads to people making their own
speculations.
Their own conclusions. And that's not always, and I've been seeing that the last couple weeks too in various space groups. Space hipsters, we've tried to keep that to a minimum, if just get rid of it, because we don't, as much as Boeing has had problems, we don't want people going after them. There are people, I know people who work for Boeing. It's not their fault. I don't want them to feel persecuted online. They've already been through enough, and I'm going
to disagree with you slightly on that. Like, if they work
I'm not talking like people in high up positions. I'm talking about people in very lower, not public facing areas, people who are just sort of worker bees there. I'm more, I think as far as their upper level management, maybe they need some.
I don't think there's anything wrong with criticizing Boeing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. And if people work for them and struggle with that, well, they chose to work for Boeing. They're a company that have caused a lot of problems recently, and it's well documented. So I don't, it's tough working for Boeing at the moment. I think that's how I see it. But shutting down criticism of Boeing. If it's justified, it's justified. My issue is a lot of it's based on speculation or untruths.
Correct. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah,
we're not seeing. I'm sorry. I'm frustrating you. We're seeing a lot of speculation. We're not seeing justified criticism. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fair. Absolutely fair. I also think when you talked about Apollo 1, Challenger, and Columbia, and whether NASA was open about that at the time. The world's so different now.
You're right.
It's hard.
No, you're right.
You can't necessarily compare those examples to this example. NASA has to be a 24/7 news organization these days.
Yeah, and during Apollo 1,
it didn't have to be. It didn't exist.
There was no internet.
Yeah,
there was no internet. There was really, people, not everybody even had TV back then.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and 24-hour news existed during the Columbia disaster. But social media wasn't a thing at that point, so not necessarily everyone had a forum to express their own opinions on those things at that point. So maybe NASA has never currently experienced a time when it's got a bit of an emergency, or a bit of not necessarily an emergency, but it's got a dilemma, and it's not dealing with it. It's not dealing with it well, and its PR for this isn't right. I also think that
it's a disaster. Yeah.
Yeah. I also think
PR is a disaster. I agree.
I also feel we have to criticize NASA. Saying it's commercial program, so it's hard to, it's not really them. It's their choice to send people up on commercial program, and they're the ones who set the rules on how this all works, and they have to manage those rules and manage the safety expectations of those programs.
I feel bad for NASA, though. I do feel. I feel bad that.
Why?
Yeah, I don't know. It's emotional. I hate saying that. I'm not basing it on logic. Logically, I'm not sorry for them because they chose that. But emotionally, I sort of feel bad just because I'm this is just a disaster. This is a PR disaster. I do think that is a PR disaster, and I feel bad for anybody who's having to deal with this right now. I do feel bad because, but I would have dealt with it different. If I was in charge, if I ruled the world, things would have been different. I would have been, my thing is, you got to be very open about it. I would have dealt with it how I deal with things. I'm not going to say where I work, but in my day job, if I feel like something is not right or something, I don't feel good about this, you go talk to somebody. You're open about it with them, right? Mm-hmm. And, and you want a culture of openness, I think, and that's important to me at any workplace. I like having a culture of openness where we can talk about an issue or maybe not. I wouldn't even say a problem, just an issue, and you don't have to worry about losing your job, or you don't have to worry about getting yelled at by somebody. Just and I feel like that's not there. I'm getting that feeling, and I'm like, that's bothersome because there are too dang people on board. This isn't. I would feel maybe a little differently if it was an uncrewed mission. I might feel slightly different, but this is two people, that I'm like, okay, that's scary, and they weren't planning on being in space for this long. I mean, it's been, about 2 months now, and they were supposed to be up there for 8 days.
Yeah.
That's kind of, yeah, exactly. I feel like they need, I don't know if anybody up there is listening to us. It would be nice, but no, I agree with you. I think there needs to be openness about this because, like the Guardian article said, I think they lost control of the narrative completely. And now everybody in the internet is making their own decision and their own speculation, and it's just gotten out of control,
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there are legitimate questions based on a number of scenarios. There was again, I just said we got to be careful about misinformation, but this post wasn't necessarily information. Jim O'Kane, who hosts one of the co-hosts of the Apollo 13 Minute podcast, which is very good if you haven't listened to it, go check that one out. He posted on his Facebook a little bit of an analysis as he sees it, and obviously it is an opinion. And he starts it with, I think. So it's clearly an opinion. I think, and he says, I think there are 4 possible outcomes with the Starliner mission. Number 1, Sonny and Butch return on Starliner successfully. Number 2, they take the Dragon home. Uncrewed Starliner re-enters okay. Number 3, they take Dragon home. Uncrewed Starliner is lost. Number 4, they return on Starliner. Worst case scenario happens. And then he said, if scenario 1, Boeing has another Starliner mission. Scenario 2, NASA abandons Starliner. Scenario 3, NASA abandons Starliner. Scenario 4, Boeing gets broken up into smaller companies. Now, obviously, this is a speculation and it's an opinion, but there are serious questions around this. If this doesn't go right, there are big implications.
It's going to be bad. Yeah,
it's going to be
very
bad. And that's why I don't understand why they don't get out ahead of this and why they weren't it was clear.
Yeah.
They knew they had a helium leak. They knew there was an issue with the propulsion system.
They launched with it.
They knew
launched
that.
With that.
So they must have had plans. I don't understand how you don't have plans. Yeah, that's where I am with this.
Yeah.
I
remember. I don't know. You probably remember this. I think it was the last Hubble resurfacing mission in 2009. I think it was the last one. And they put another shuttle on the pad just in case.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, just in case something happens with this shuttle and they're out of propulsion, they're out of fuel because they have to go to that high orbit during Hubble. We have a second one to rescue, as a rescue mission just in case.
Just in case. And they didn't hide it. It was there. You can miss it. It was there.
You can't hide that. You can't hide another big ass shuttle on the launch pad. So they couldn't hide that, but they were very open about that. And I was like, yeah, that's a wonderful idea. Like that made me feel good. And yeah. So this is an opposite situation because there appears to have been nothing as you said, there was no plan. Yeah. I'm like, what?
Yeah, or if there is, they've kept it secret, and why? It doesn't make sense to me why they would keep it secret. So there's another factor here which I want to talk about because I feel like this is going to sound like I'm getting a bit preachy, and you're right, Emily. We perhaps haven't always got it right ourselves in our personal postings online, but this week, particularly with everything that's been going on, as I said, with the riots at home. And with these crazy stories out the Olympics, not just about the athletes, but even the stupid stuff about the opening ceremony.
Yeah.
One thing we were taught in history at high school was about checking your sources. Who, what, why, when. Like, are these credible sources? And it's one of the first lessons I remember learning as a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
As a 12-year-old. And we now we can all share things which can then get shared and can then people may take as being real. It's even more important. Back then, that was just if you're doing some historical research, be aware of that. But it should be the same with what we're posting and what we're choosing to share online. Who, what, why, when? Where are these sources coming from? Why? And let's bring the Olympics into this again, right? Who has got the most to gain from making the Olympics look bad at the moment?
Who's probably bad people is
Russia.
my guess.
Who aren't
Russia,
there. They're not there. They got banned, right? And it's been proven before that the CIA and the FBI have said
that's what I meant by bad people.
Yeah, they've said that Russia have used the internet to try and sow division.
Yes, they have.
Right, that's a known thing, right? That I'm fairly sure that's been proven by the CIA and FBI. And that's not me saying it's a conspiracy theory, but it wouldn't surprise you.
Not a conspiracy.
It wouldn't surprise me if Russian agents are using the Olympics as a way of just trying to sow disunity in the rest of the world, because whenever the world is divided, when the Western world is divided, they know it undermines our democracies. And you can see the same thing going on with what's going on in the UK right now with misinformation about who's committed crimes, which has caused people to get badly hurt, right? All of this stuff is fairly it might not be the case, but it might be the case. So just check your sources. Just check them, because if that is what's going on, it's not good news. Like you're playing into foreign actors trying to manipulate our world. You're playing into it.
And can I add something?
Absolutely.
I'm kind of plagiarizing this quote from somebody. If I mention the person's name, I'm going to get a Quindar tone, so I'll shut up. But there's a great quote, basically, that, dictators tend to simplify things.
Yeah.
And they tend to do this to act on people's emotions, like, oh my God, this is, they tend to do this for a reason. So just be aware of that,
And of course, social media for the first time ever has allowed us to be emotional and share things and be angry and share our anger and therefore our democracies are more vulnerable than they've ever been.
Yes.
Who else has an interest in Starliner not going well? The Russians. Like, come on.
Correct.
I don't have a tin hat on here. I'm just saying, be aware that it's been proven by the FBI and CIA that this has happened before. It may happen again.
Yes.
So just be aware of what you're sharing and why you're sharing it. And if you are angry about something and your gut instinct is, oh my God, that's outrageous, just stop for a moment and think, is this real?
Yeah. Take about 10 seconds to calm down.
Exactly. And that's
walk away from it.
All I'm trying to get at is that all that's happening is people are falling out with each other and there's disunity being sowed. And in some cases, when you bring it back to this space flight, the families at home are being perhaps seeing things that they shouldn't see. And again, I bring it back around. That's why you should have all the information out there. Let the families know first, then put it out there. Just so everyone knows exactly what the deal is. And no one can say something like, oh, there's been a disaster on the ISS and it's caused by Starliner and so on and so forth. It all comes back, doesn't it? And yes, just be aware. Anyway, I really wanted to have a chat about misinformation today. And I feel like the Starliner example in space enables us to have that conversation because we are seeing it play out in front of our very eyes.
Yep, in real time. Often. In real time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we would love to know your thoughts on this. Obviously, opinions are still valid. We're not saying we don't want to hear your opinions on Starliner or anything. Like I said, Jim O'Kane's opinions was a wonderful one. I enjoyed reading it. But it says at the start, I think, and it wasn't sharing a post or an image that clearly was doctored. It was his thoughts. And the thing is, I also know he's a well-educated on the space world. I know it's a good, because I know that source. I know him. I'm aware of his background. So his opinion is one I want to read and I value. And the same as Eric Berger. I value that article, even if I just think I wish those sources were named. That's my own personal opinion. Anyway, that's what we've spoke about. The articles we have mentioned, I will put in the show notes as discussed earlier. The show notes you can find by clicking on the link in the description of this podcast on your podcast provider or by heading to spaceandthingspodcast.com.
Coming at you faster than Skylab falling down on Australia. This is the Space and Things podcast.
So, Emily, apart from what we just discussed, has anything caught your eye in spaceflight since the last time we had one of these segments 2 weeks ago?
Yes. Well, I linked an article. I just sent it to Dave, and we'll have it in the show notes. But it's actually an opinion piece from Scientific American, and it's by Thomas Zurbuchen, who is a former NASA official. I believe he's a NASA official, I think, and Nadia Drake. And basically, he's talking about, how he believes a few weeks ago, NASA canceled the Viper lunar rover.
Yeah.
Due to budget issues. And, this article really is fascinating, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it only because I think our main discussion on the show this week is so important. But it's a really fascinating article to read from somebody who has a lot of experience with budgeting and things of that matter. But there's a quote that kind of stuck out to me. Basically, he's discussing how he thinks maybe the loss of this program could take away from the Artemis program. And that's a really good argument. Apollo, there was a similar, over 50 years ago, a lot of people had similar arguments that it wasn't really a science-focused program as much as it should have been.
Yeah.
They only devoted 3 missions to lunar science. I mean, really. So dedicated missions. But he is quoted as saying, "My worry is that much of the science in Artemis goes the way that the science largely exists on the International Space Station. In my view, the science on the space station has been rather meager considering the investment. There are a few transformative science and nature papers that are quite well cited, but not enough of them." So I think that's really interesting to read from someone who has experience in NASA science in that area. I was wondering about that too when I heard that got canceled, because I'm like, well, how is that going to affect Artemis? Because if you recall, historically, before Apollo launched, some of you might not know this, and that's fine. I'm not calling anybody out. That's fine. But before Apollo, there were many American lunar missions that were uncrewed, such as Lunar Orbiter and Lunar Surveyor. Also Ranger, that basically crashed in the moon. These were missions basically to figure out the moon to some degree before we put people there, right?
Yeah.
And we don't have a lot of that right now. I think we have LRO, which has been up there for quite some time. And I know other countries have tried to put things up there, but we've never had a lunar rover, to my knowledge, on the moon. I don't think the U.S. has ever had a lunar rover up there. The Soviets did. But they had a couple, to my knowledge, but
China.
We never had one. Yeah, China has had them. We've never had anything like that. So I'm sort of like, I understand budgets. And if you need any clarification on budgeting, I want to direct everybody to the magnificent episodes we did with Casey Dreyer of the Planetary Society earlier. Go have a listen to those. Those are very informative. But I understand budgets. I understand that some things have to be canceled to make way for other things, et cetera, et cetera. Certain things are not necessarily a priority, but this paper is very, this paper that is in Scientific American, it'll be in our show notes. It's worth a read, I think. I read it and I was like, he makes a lot of good points. So just worth a read, something to look at.
Yeah.
So
something you mentioned there kind of links in with the thing that's caught my eye. You said the amount of science that's come out of the ISS for the investment isn't particularly good. Is that right? Is that an accurate quote?
Yeah, I think that can be said to
That's
that.
the right summary of what you said there. Well, the article that caught my eye was in the Financial Times, and it says, "Spending watchdog questions UK investment in the European Space Agency." This is just what you want to hear when we're currently looking at some period of austerity and budget cutting in the UK. So it basically says that for every £1 that the UK government has invested in the European Space Agency, we're getting only 93 pence back in contracts. This is since 2015, from the period 2015 to February 2023. So quite modern, not perhaps that up to date, and not historical. I think if they persevere with that over the next couple of years, then I think there will be a better return. I think we're getting to that point where that curve is starting to go up on the graph, based on what we're hearing and from listening to things like the Space Boffins podcast, which talk a lot about what investments are going on in the UK industry. I certainly feel, and granted that is partly funded by the UK space industry, so they're trying to put out a thing. But I think we are getting a lot of investment. We had 2 spaceports built in this country in the last year, or being built. So I think things are happening. However, it certainly does paint a picture, and something we have to consider. What are we getting out in the UK? What are we getting out of our space investments? And does this watchdog research potentially put a few things in doubt over the next few years, and more budget cutting in space from the UK, where this has been a growing industry with growing investment? Let's talk about us having our own flight with Axiom, which obviously costs money. Are all these things now in doubt if these aren't going to bring in the investment that they want and they're expecting from this? Now, of course, I think Brexit has a big part to play in this, and that's a whole episode in itself. But because since 2015, that happened. So has it gone down? Has it gone up? Where is this going? I'd like to see more on this and more research on this. I think it's important that we're having these conversations. I don't think we should waste money on anything. We always say that investment in space always brings money back. And is it not doing that? Is this because ESA is wasteful? Why is it not bringing the money back that we think it should do? Anyway, I think it's an interesting article, and I think it's worth reading. So I'll put it in the show notes, and I hope that it gets turned around as well, because I'd like to see more investment in space, and I'd like to see that the government invest more in space so that we can get more private companies involved as well. So yes, I feel they're both connected, these articles, even though they're about different countries. There's certainly some chat now about investment and whether it's worth it or not. So that's interesting.
Coming at you faster than Skylab falling down on Australia. This is the Space and Things podcast.
Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for listening, and thank you for all your support. We really do appreciate it. This is the kind of episode where in the past we probably would have had an expert guest to help us out, but we've gone it alone. And we hope that you feel that we're a source that you can trust. We do make it clear when we're expressing our opinions over facts. I think we do anyway. And of course, we have said, if we have said anything here which is incorrect, please do get in touch. The good thing about podcasts is you can edit them, and you can then re-upload the audio. So if there is an error, I can change it so that anyone who downloads in the future won't have that error in it anymore. And we can also make amendments going forward. We can say, hey, that last episode had an error in, or post on social media that had an error in. We don't mind admitting our mistakes. So yeah, please do get in contact and let us know if there are things that are wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. We're more than open to hearing about, hey, you got this wrong. That's fine. We're not going to get offended. We actually like being informed about the right thing. So yeah, feel free to do that. So thank you for listening, and a big shout out to all of you who continue to share this podcast with your spaceflight loving friends and family, and an even bigger shout out to our Patreon subscribers who power this podcast. If you haven't already, please check out our Patreon page by visiting patreon.com/spaceandthings. We'll be back next week with more Space and Things, but don't forget that in space, no one can hear you me.
Thank you for listening. This has been the Space and Things podcast.